Economic growth. This is a macroeconomic aspect. Okay, in economics we have like two big branches. One is microeconomics, when we are focusing in an individual or in a specific economic agents. So it's like when we are talking about a firm, a decision that is coming from a company, an individual agent like a consumer or something like that. That is micro. And then we have macroeconomic. And inside of macroeconomics, we have again two parts. One is more focusing on the actual reality. So it's worried about any kind of crisis. It's worried about any kind of problem in terms of prices. Things like that. So the main goal of that macroeconomic branch is try to prevent a coming crisis, or in the case in which you are suffering a crisis, make that situation is going to be smooth and short. But that is not this. What is this? This is when we are focusing on the long run. Okay, it's important, the short run, but you are going to see that part of the economies is going to focus on the long run. Yeah, I have to be aware that the reality is complicated, but also I need to have a future or long-run goal. And that goal is going to be economic growth. In fact, it's so important, this question, that if you go back to the history of economics, the first economist that we have, which is Adam Smith, the main question that was behind his book was, what is behind the rich of the nations? So the wealth of the nation. So it is that thing. Why some economies are rich while other economies are poor? Why is that? Because if I know what is behind that, I can make that poor economies start to be bigger or richer, which is really interesting in terms of welfare. In fact, here I'd like to start with this quote coming from Robert Lucas, who was Nobel Prize. And I like this because this is one probably of the authors who is more focused on this aspect. In fact, for him, he realized about the consequence of this part of the economics in terms of the human wealth. So it's like consequence for human welfare involved in questions like this are simply staggering. So once one starts to think about them, it is really difficult to think about anything else. Because at the end, we are talking about the welfare of many people and the implication of that. So, what is the thing that we are going to see? We are going to start with the first indicator of economic growth. Here we are talking about economics. So we are not going to consider some aspects that are really important also for the welfare of people. Like can be in terms of income distribution inside of one economy. It's true that you can have a really high GDP, but how is the distribution of that GDP? Also is something important to consider. But here we are not going to talk about aspects like that. Okay? Instead of that, we are going to consider the main indicator for welfare. And that indicator is going to be the real GDP per capita. Real GDP estimation per capita. What is that? If you go back to the estimation of the GDP, GDP is production. So we are going to assume that as higher is the production of one economy, that economy, the people in that place is going to be better. But it's not good enough just GDP or nominal GDP. Why is that? Because when we are estimating the GDP, the nominal GDP, the thing that we are doing is, okay, I'm going to put all together the whole production of one economy. The problem is I have cars, I have tables, I have houses, so I can put all of them together just like physical units. Instead of that, I need all of them in the same terms. Why not money? Euros in our case. So, by sure, I'm going to need the quantity, but also the price of each good. Is the only way of getting all those goods in the same units, money, euros in this case. So I'm going to consider all the prices times all the cars times the price of the car, plus all the table times the price of the table, and so on. And then we can put together all those quantities, and then we are going to get the estimation of the GDP. That is going to be the nominal GDP, as you probably already know because of the video. And it's not something bad. The problem of that is when you want to evaluate how is the evolution of your GDP along the time. And why is that a problem? Because when you are introducing or you are observing the GDP along the time, that GDP is not just production, it's also prices. So one of the things that it can be happening is not just the output is growing, if that GDP is growing, but also prices. Oh, in fact, it can be the case that the production is constant over time, but just because the prices are higher and higher over time, you are going to get a higher estimation of the GDP, which is not real. It's not that you are doing a really good job as the economy. It's a problem of prices. And your goal is not getting the evolution of prices. That is a different thing. Here, the thing that you want to evaluate is how is the evolution of the production. That's why, instead of the nominal GDP, we use the real GDP. What is the GDP, is when you are fixing the prices. So I'm going to take a year, the base year for me, and then I'm going to have the production for each different year. And instead of multiplying that production by the prices of each year, I'm going to consider always the same prices. So it's like having the price of the car always for the base year. Let's say this year, I don't know, 2021. And then for the next coming years, I'm going to use those prices for the different cars that are coming or are producing every year. So, doing that thing, the good thing that we are going to get is that all the evolution of that quantity, of that magnitude of the GDP is going to be something related with real production. So, if that GDP, the real one, is growing, it's because the production is growing. It's not because the prices are fixed now. So that's why we are going to talk about in terms of real GDP and not nominal GDP. But also we are going to add this, per capita. Why is that? We need to make a correction in terms of size. The size can be a problem. Imagine two opposite economies like Russia, which is really big, and Sweden, which is smaller. If you just observe the real GDP of each economy, and you don't know anything about them, you don't even know how they are, you are coming from a different planet, you are going to get the conclusion that people in Russia are much better than in Sweden. But that is not real. That is just because the size of the economy. So that's why we need to make a correction of that. And we are going to consider that GDP in terms of per capita. And just doing that, something as simple as that, is going to give me a better approximation, I can say, of the welfare of that economy. That's why we are going to use not just real GDP, but real GDP per capita. So, as I told you, this is going to be always the indicators that we are going to use. Why? Because we have normally, not always, but we normally have this kind of information, and also it's useful. The reality always is much more complex or difficult to understand, but this is good enough, and that's why we are going to get results using this, useful results. As I told you previously, it's not perfect. No, it's not. Reality is difficult, it's complex, so we should need more indicators. Indicators talking about how is that income distribution, what is the cost of growing, in terms of less time for us, or in terms of more pollution, also that is true. It's part of the reality. Here we are not considering that, but by sure there's going to be more research talking about those aspects. At least we need to have this. And then the economists need to stop and then think about those other terms or variables that are behind. So here you just have some example about how was the case of United States. Why we use that? Well, first of all, because the main reference books are coming from the United States, and also because it's an example of one economy that it has been growing over time. And nowadays, one of the most developed economies. And the conclusion that some researchers achieved with that case is, if you want to grow, if you want to be a big economy in economic terms, you need to grow over time. It's not a thing of just 1 year, a good year, or 2 good years. It's something that it has to be constant over time. So here we have a different example in which we have a map, and depending on the color of the map is the income, right? So we can see that there are many economies over here, basically, that are really poor, okay? It's the lower income that you can face. Then the richer economy like this, or over here, but you have many different examples of that. Well, this is not really important, it's the same thing. Oh, yeah, you're going to see this in the slides. I'm not going to go deep in this because we don't have too much time. It's just in case you see something like that in any book or something like that, or in the future. It's the rule of 70. And it's like a formula that is going to tell me how many years you need to be the double. You have a GDP, and if you want to be just the double of that, given the current growth rate, how many years you need to get that value. It's as simple as that. So to know that number is just 70, that's why the name, the rule of 70, over the annual growth rate of that variable. And here you just have the proof, just in case you want to know why is that 70. So it has a meaning, it's coming from something. It's coming from the fact that you want to double. Well, this formula, so I don't want to do the whole thing here. Probably you already know something about that, I'm not really sure. It's a formula that is telling me how it's going to be a variable, that the initial value, it was this, it can be any. I know also this lowercase x is because it's the growth rate of that variable, and n is the number of years in which that variable has been growing at that growth rate. Okay? So, because in this case I just want to have the double of this, that's why instead of this value, you are going to see the double of the initial value, and so on. Okay? But as I told you, this year, just in case you want to check that, but I'm not going to ask about that. So here we have many other cases about the growth of different economies from the period coming from the 1980 to 2010. This is the case of China and India. They are the economies with higher growth. This is the average annual growth rate, so it's per year, more or less, they have been growing at those percentages, which are really high, at least for economies like ours. For China, this is not so big as it should be, given the number of people who is living there. Okay? So, in general, we can see that over the last, or at least over this period, the economic growth has been positive. But even this period, which is pretty close to our time, we have economies like Zimbabwe that is decreasing. Well, here we have the case of India. Well, just an example if you want to watch this. You have here more information. But the main conclusion here is we are going to see the good news that each economy can be reached anytime, or at least in a moment. The bad news is that if you are rich, it doesn't mean that you always are going to be rich. We have, for instance, the case of Argentina, that was considered one of the most rich nations, but nowadays she's still suffering crisis, a high inflation. So it's worse than years before. And now we are going to see a little bit more what is the from where is coming the growth. This was our variable of objective, real GDP divided population, that is real GDP per capita, right? So this is our goal. I want to get this value higher and higher over time, and that is the only way of being a rich economy. Also, this variable can be decomposed by this other element. In fact, you can see that this, which is multiplying here, is divided here, so this and this is cancelled off, this and this also, and this also. So, final thing that you actually have here is real GDP over population, so it's the same thing. The only thing that we are doing is like decomposing that element in different elements. The first one is real GDP divided L. You don't have here L, I think. L is the number of people who is working, so workers, employees. Here we have also L, now divided by A. This is active population. What is that? I think it's not here. Active population is people who is working or they are looking for a job. So it doesn't mean they are working, but at least they have to be looking for a job. What is known also as unemployed. Here we have population older than 16, which in reality means population that is in the age of working. So it's older than 16, but also it's not population higher than, since depending on the economy, the age in which you are retired. And here is just population. The thing is, you can see that just mathematically, as higher is this value, for instance, over this value, higher is going to be the result. So the conclusion of this is, as higher is the number of people who is working, given the actual population, it's going to be better for the economy. Of course, if we have an active population, as higher is the number of people of that active population who is actually working, it's going to be more productive, that economy, and the general welfare is going to be higher. The thing that we have here is the active population over the population that is in the age of working. And of course, as higher is the number of people who is active, that economy is going to be better. Why is that? Because though active population doesn't mean that you are working, but means that at least you can be both. You can be working or looking for a job. If you are looking for a job, probably today you don't have a job, but maybe tomorrow you will. So that is something that is going to generate, or at least you have the possibility of generating more production. So that's why it's important and it's good. And this can be also a very cultural factor, because we have some countries or economies where, for instance, women decided not to work for a cultural aspect, like was the case of Spain several decades ago. And that is going to affect the production of that economy and then the welfare of the people who is living there. And the thing that we have here is number of population that is in the age of working given the population. Of course, if we have a population with many people which is really old, well, it's something that we are not going to change, but it's going to have a consequence. See, most of the population is really old or very young, means that that economy is going to produce less than an economy with a strong amount of people that is in the age of working. The thing is, okay, everything up here is really interesting, but it's something in which we don't have too much room to work as a politician. If I want to make a policy, an economic policy, I don't have too much room, as I said. Probably I can make something to, like, getting a better labor market, and the people who is working a job finally get a job. So this L, which is the number of people who is working, is higher, doing something like that. Or making policies to try that population that is not active want to be active. But this is not something that a politician can do or manage. The thing in which we are going to focus, because we can do something, is the first element. And this first element, which is real GDP over workers, is the productivity of workers. So the main conclusion that we are going to get from here is, as higher is the productivity of workers, better is going to be the growth of that economy. And in fact, that is the only variable that we can manage or we can change to get a higher production, higher welfare in general. So, this is going to be our goal, the productivity. How is the way of measuring productivity? We are going to use this one, production over number of workers. But the best one is not that. The best one is production over hours worked. Why is that? Because sometimes we can have just one worker, but not for the whole period, but imagine that like 2 hours per week. So if I want to get the productivity of that worker, I'm going to give high productivity, but it's not real. So instead of that, the good thing is having the actual hours work. But because that data is really difficult to find, and the other is not really bad, we are going to use this in economic terms. Okay, and that is economics. We have our theories, we have our things that we want to quantify, but the reality is that the data is scarce, really scarce. So sometimes we have to make approximations, and in terms that if they are fair enough, that is going to be good. Well, but before observing what is behind productivity, let's start with production. And then, from production, we are going to go to productivity. What is behind production? Well, we are going to talk about the aggregate production function. Okay? So if you see this, it's because it's aggregate production function. What is behind that? And you're going to see that these are the elements that are going to be behind that variable. In fact, yeah, we can here a different way to see that, but it's the same thing. So this Y is coming from production, so that is the real GDP for us. Okay? But instead of putting real GDP, because it's really long in macroeconomics, we just use Y. But it's the same thing. That output of production of real GDP depends on T. What is going to be T for us? It's going to be technology. Also, it's true that in some reference book, instead of T, they use A. But because we use A for active population, to have things clear, we are going to put T here. But also, you must know that sometimes in some books, they use A for technology. So it's going to be technology. Also, here we have the production factors. In fact, you already know two of them. One of them is labor, and the other is capital. You know from previous chapter when we were talking about international trade, the production factor, when we were talking about the Hess-Carolyn model, two production factors, one was labor, the other was capital. It's the same thing here. Okay? So L is labor. As higher is the number of workers, you can produce more. As higher is the volume of machines, so all the things that you can buy by capital, higher is your output. But here we have a new element, 8, which is human capital. Also is capital, okay? But this capital is a little bit different. It's human capital. What is that? It's not something physical. It's us. It's in fact, instead of us, because that is labor, just workers, is what makes us more productive. Like our knowledge, like our experience, or like our health condition. That is human capital. And we call that human capital because we are making an investment. We are investing money to get our knowledge, to get our money or time, our experience, and so on. Human capital. While labor, capital, physical capital, and human capital are production factor, technology is something different, okay? It's not a production function. I don't have technology. It's something different. In fact, technology is the combination of those production factors that is going to generate a higher volume of production. So, technology is not just a computer. Computer can be, or a computer with a person in mind, like that. A computer is something which is physical. The screen is made by any kind of material, and the other elements can be steel, plastic. That is capital. If you have anyone working on that, it's labor. But when you combine those physical elements in a certain way through a software, you are getting technology. So it's the software, the technology, while the rest of the elements are physical, are capital. But in the way in which you have configured those elements and you have introduced a software, that is technology. So technology is not always something that you can see as a physical element. No, it's the thing that is making that this element, this plastic and so on, is doing something special and is more productive. That is technology. Another example of technology, which is nothing about something sophisticated in terms of computers, things like that, was in the time in which Henry Ford in the United States was producing cars. Initially, it was one worker doing the whole car. So that was a waste of time because that worker was running from one place to the other, trying, getting the wheels, getting the paint, getting blah blah blah, and then they were losing a lot of time. Instead of that, he decided that now the worker is going to be fixed in one point, and it's going to be the car the thing that is going to move. And each worker is going to do just a specific thing, but very good and really fast. And then you're going to get a higher level of production in the same time. So 1 hour in that way was much more productive than the same hour in the other method. That was also technology. You have the same, let's say more or less the same physical capital, human capital, labor, but now the combination is better. And that is coming from technology. So it's something that is going to enter in my equation, multiplying the effect of the production factor. That's why it's outside and it's multiplying. Also, we are going to assume that we are living in a context of constant return to scale, which means that if you double your input, so your production factor, you are going to double the output. the production. Well, yeah, it can be the case, why not? But I don't care about doubling now the output. Why I'm doing this? Because I want to show you this property. And now I'm going to use it in the terms that I need. In fact, instead of talking about the double of output, the thing that I want to evaluate is the output over labor. Because this is GDP, this is labor, so the whole thing is GDP per capita. So now I have what is behind the real GDP per capita, which is going to be an element that is behind of welfare. Welfare, sorry, it's not per capita. I mean productivity, because it's per worker. Okay, sorry about that. My final goal is getting a higher GDP per capita, but I'm doing that thing making higher the productivity of workers, of labor. So production over labor. So I know that this is, so if I do this, it's because in fact I'm introducing, instead of time 2, like was the previous case, I'm doing time 1 over L. L over L is 1, that's why it disappeared. Of course, now I don't want to have the whole output. The whole output or the whole production of one economy depend on the number of workers. But now I want to know the productivity of each worker. That's why that variable disappeared. Instead of that, I'm going to have technology. It's going to have an effect. Capital per worker, so the number of machines that a worker has, and human capital per worker. So it's how is the knowledge of each worker, for instance. So and those are the 3 elements in which this theory is focusing, at least at the real beginning. So here is just an example of one estimation of this equation. The authors here, they are assuming this specific function, which is out of Douglas. Though you don't really need to understand what is the meaning of each element, okay, here. But well, it's not bad knowing that this is an equation that we usually use in economic terms because it has empirical evidence. It's something that fits quite well the reality. And the main conclusion of these authors was that though China, because this was based in the case of China and India, how it was so big that growth, but in fact how it was so really big in the specific case of China respect to India, and they studied why was that. The main conclusion was that it was half of that difference was coming from the big investment of China in physical capital. The other part of the reason was the technology thing. So basically, China made a big investment in those 2 elements, technology and physical capital per worker.